Hello everyone. Welcome to 90-Day Truth Files. Real stories, real truth. Subscribe now. Just letting you know that we are moving out and you're figuring out how or I'm moving out. You were mad that you were never a part of the family and mom finally accepts you and you want to move out. Are you crazy? Like moving, got out of the house is not an option. Can't be miserable all day long, every day. Is divorce in the cars? Yeah, am at my breaking point. No. She was spotted alone at the airport. Makeup smudged. No luggage in sight, sunglasses on indoors to hide the tears that had clearly been falling for hours. And the biggest shock wasn't that Jenny was leaving India. It was that Sumit wasn't with her. Not even close. No goodbye, no chase, not even a statement, just silence from the man she gave up her entire life for. The photos leaked fast, and the internet exploded faster. Everyone was asking the same thing. What happened inside that house to make Jenny finally walk away after 10 years of emotional chaos, public shame, secret marriages, fake promises, and non-stop battles with his family? Because if this woman who waded through visa limbo, humiliation, and being called a curse, if she was done, then something massive must have snapped. Welcome to TLC Drama Live. I'm Sabrina and today we're not sugarcoating anything. Subscribe right now and drop your thoughts in the comments because this isn't your average marriage meltdown. This is a slow emotional fire that burned until the final match was lit in front of millions. There's something bone deep about betrayal that isn't loud. It doesn't always come with yelling or violence or cameras catching the moment. Sometimes it shows up in your body when you realize you're not tired. You're done. And that's exactly the energy Jenny carried when she stepped into that airport without saying a word to the man who once swore he'd choose her over everything. Because guess what? He didn't. He chose comfort. He chose image. He chose control. And Jenny finally chose herself. For the first time in years, the entire world saw her make a decision without fear. And that terrified Sumit more than anything. If the person you've begged to fight for you doesn't notice when you stop fighting, you were never the one they were fighting for. Let's rewind. Because this didn't happen overnight. Jenny and Sumit had been putting on a performance long before the producers ever showed up. From the outside, it looked like your classic cultural clash, age gap, love story, society versus romance trope. But if you were really watching, really listening, the cracks weren't just about their difference in age or where they came from. The real story was hidden in who controlled the narrative. Every time Jenny spoke up about how isolated she felt, Sumit called her dramatic. Every time she asked for privacy, he claimed she was trying to divide him from his family. But the worst part, Jenny started to believe it was her fault, that she was the disruption, that she had to be more agreeable, more quiet, more grateful. She shrunk herself into someone who could survive in a house that was never built for her. Until survival turned into silence and silence turned into something worse. Numbness. So when she finally walked away, it wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was the quietest rebellion, no press conference, no staged exit. It was a woman who finally realized that nothing was going to change if she didn't make the change herself. She booked that flight without telling the show, without waiting for production approval, without even making a goodbye post. She was done being a storyline, she was done waiting for her voice to matter. She was gone. And if you think that moment was the real shock, wait. Until you see how Sumit reacted when he realized she was serious this time. Every day inside that house chipped away at her piece by piece until even her silence started to sound like resistance. Jenny wasn't just tired. She was trapped inside a life where even breathing without permission felt like rebellion. Her clothes monitored, her meals criticized, her schedule dismissed. All of it ran through an invisible filter called family rules, enforced by a woman who once said she'd rather die than see Jenny become her daughter-in-law. And now that same woman dictated how Jenny should live, dress, eat, sleep, and speak. While Sumit stood there acting like it was all normal. As if expecting your wife to bow to your mother's every command was love. as if enduring humiliation was compromised. It wasn't the shouting or the insults that broke her down. It was the constant small erasers of who she was. Not being allowed to wear shorts inside her own home. Being side-eyed for watching TV after dark. Having to hide affection with her own husband like they were two strangers in a guest house. That level of micromanagement doesn't come from concern. It comes from control. And every time Jenny tried to bring it up, Sumit hit her with the same line. This is how Indian families are. But the truth, that wasn't culture. That was convenience. Because when the same man who once said he'd run away with her now says he's finally happy being back under his mother's rule, something's off. Jenny saw through it. She saw a man who wanted both. The Western love story and the safety net of his traditional comfort zone. And when those two things clashed, he expected Jenny to fold. When a person uses culture as a shield to deflect accountability, they're not preserving tradition. They're hiding from change. Inside that house, Jenny had no room to feel like a wife. She was a tenant, a guest, a problem to be managed quietly. And the worst part, Sumit had started gaslighting her into believing that she was the one creating tension, that if she'd only stopped reacting, his mother wouldn't snap. If she'd dress more modestly, no one would complain. If she'd stop asking for privacy, she'd get more respect. That's how control works. It makes you feel like your discomfort is the real issue, not the behavior causing it. Jenny tried. She softened her voice, bit her tongue, wore what they wanted, stayed in her room, said less, and still she wasn't accepted. That was the moment she realized acceptance was never the goal. They wanted obedience. The pressure built quietly like steam behind a sealed door. Jenny knew if she didn't speak up now, she'd lose whatever voice she had left. So the next time Sumit dismissed her frustration with a smug smile and called it a small issue, she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She looked him dead in the eye and said, I'm done living like I don't matter. Because when silence becomes your only way to survive, speaking up becomes the most dangerous and necessary act of love for yourself. He kept saying it was tradition, as if that one word could erase the years of chaos, rejection, and betrayal she had already endured to stand beside him. Every time Jenny questioned why she had to follow someone else's schedule, sleep patterns, food preferences, or even wardrobe rules inside her own marriage, Sumit wrapped the answer in a blanket labeled joint family culture. But when you looked closer, it wasn't culture. No blank lines, continuous narration like U.S. documentary drama. Welcome to TLC Drama Live. I'm Sabrina. And today we're diving into one of the most emotionally explosive relationship breakdowns the 90-Day Fiancé universe has ever witnessed. This is not a rumor. This is not a random fan theory. This is a psychological and emotional unraveling that has been building quietly. For more than a decade. Jenny and Sumit were once the poster couple for cross-cultural love, age gap romance, and love conquers all fairy tales. But what happens when love turns into control, silence, and emotional suffocation? What happens when the woman who gave up her country, her family, her identity, and her future finally decides she is done? That's exactly what we're breaking down today. And trust me, this story is darker, deeper, and more heartbreaking than any staged reality TV storyline. It started with a photo. A single leaked airport image. Jenny. Alone. No Sumit. No luggage. Sunglasses indoors. Makeup smudged. Face swollen from hours of crying. No camera crew. No TLC announcement. No dramatic goodbye. Just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any tell-all confrontation ever could. Fans immediately knew something was wrong. Because Jenny has endured humiliation, deception, secret marriages, visa nightmares, public criticism, and family rejection for years. For her to walk away without noise meant one thing. Something inside her had finally snapped. Let's rewind. Because Jenny and Sumit's relationship was never just about love. From the beginning, it was built on imbalance. Jenny was older, foreign, isolated. Sumit was younger, rooted, tied to family expectations. From the outside, viewers saw a cultural clash. But behind the scenes, it was a power dynamic disguised as tradition. Every time Jenny expressed loneliness, Sumit dismissed her feelings as overreaction. Every time she asked for boundaries with his family, he accused her of trying to break Indian culture. Over time, Jenny internalized that narrative. She started shrinking herself to fit into a house that was never designed for her existence. She gave up friends. She gave up her independence. She gave up her voice. And what started as compromise slowly turned into erasure. Inside that house, Jenny wasn't a wife. She was a guest. A problem. A cultural disruption that needed to be managed quietly. Her clothing choices were monitored. Her meals criticized. Her schedule questioned. Her privacy denied. Even affection with her husband had to be hidden like a forbidden act. And the most painful part? Sumit normalized it. He acted like this was love. Like this was family values. Like this was tradition. But tradition without empathy becomes control. Culture without compassion becomes oppression. And Jenny slowly realized that she was living in a system where her existence was tolerated, not celebrated. People often think emotional breaking points come from screaming fights or dramatic cheating scandals. But Jenny's breaking point came from something quieter. Numbness. That moment when you stop arguing because you realize nothing will change. When you stop crying because crying doesn't move anyone. When you stop asking because asking makes you feel like a burden. That's where Jenny was. And when she stepped into that airport alone, she wasn't angry. She wasn't loud. She was done. Sumit's silence was the loudest part of this story. No statement. No social media response. No emotional plea. No chasing her to the airport. Nothing. That silence confirmed what many fans had suspected for years. When Jenny stopped fighting for him, he didn't fight for her. Because she was never the one he was willing to fight for. This relationship didn't collapse overnight. It collapsed one small moment at a time. One dismissed feeling. One controlled decision. One public humiliation. One private disappointment. Over and over again until Jenny's identity became smaller than the house she was trapped in. But what really happened behind closed doors? What was the final trigger that made Jenny book that flight without telling production, without telling Sumit, without telling the world? And why did Sumit react in a way that shocked even his own family? Stay with us. Because what we're about to reveal next changes everything you thought you knew about Jenny and Sumit's love story. And trust me, the emotional fallout is just beginning. But the airport photo was just the surface crack. The real earthquake happened inside that house long before Jenny ever stepped onto that plane. Behind closed doors, the tension had been building in ways that cameras never fully captured. Sumit had always lived a double life, one where he promised Jenny unconditional love and another where he never fully cut the emotional umbilical cord to his family's control. Inside the household, every decision had to pass through an invisible committee of approval. What Jenny wore, what she cooked, when she slept, how she spoke, who she talked to, and even how she laughed, all of it felt filtered through a judgmental lens. She was constantly reminded that she was not from there, that she didn't belong, that she was an outsider who needed to adjust or disappear. And adjustment never meant mutual compromise. It always meant Jenny shrinking. Sumit, meanwhile, had mastered the art of appearing supportive while doing nothing to change the system. He would whisper to Jenny that he understood her pain, that he was on her side, that things would change. But when the moment came to stand up to his family, he folded. He stayed silent. He smiled politely. He chose peace at home over peace in his marriage. Over time, Jenny realized that his promises were emotional sedation, just enough to keep her from leaving, never enough to actually fix anything. The power dynamic was subtle but relentless. Sumit controlled the narrative. He controlled how their relationship was presented to his family, to production, to fans, and even to Jenny herself. When she complained, he framed her as sensitive. When she cried, he called it drama. When she demanded respect, he accused her of not respecting culture. And slowly, she began to question her own reality. That is how emotional gaslighting works. You stop trusting your own feelings. You start believing the person who invalidates you. Behind the scenes, Jenny reportedly kept a private journal. In it, she wrote about feeling invisible, about feeling like a burden, about feeling like a temporary guest in her own marriage. She described days where no one spoke to her, meals where she ate alone, and nights where she cried quietly because she felt like affection itself was considered shameful in that household. She wrote about wanting to scream but being too tired to fight. One of the most painful moments came when Sumit's mother publicly stated that she would rather die than accept Jenny as her daughter-in-law. Years later, that same woman became the authority figure in Jenny's daily life. Imagine living under the supervision of someone who once declared your existence unacceptable. Every correction, every criticism, every sigh carried the weight of that history. And Sumit watched it happen. He normalized it. He asked Jenny to endure it. As time passed, Sumit became more comfortable in that environment. He reconnected with the traditional structure he had once claimed to reject. He enjoyed the security, the social acceptance, the familial validation. And when Jenny asked him if he was still willing to choose her over everything, his answer was no longer clear. It was no longer passionate. It was conditional. And conditional love is often the beginning of the end. The turning point, according to insiders, happened during a private argument that never made it to the cameras. Jenny reportedly confronted Sumit about his lack of support, his emotional distance, and his increasing alignment with his family's control. She asked him a simple question: "If I leave today, would you come?" Sumit did not answer immediately. And in that silence, Jenny found her answer. She later told a close friend that she realized in that moment that she had been fighting alone for years. She realized that she had become the only one holding the relationship together, the only one sacrificing, the only one believing in a future that Sumit was no longer willing to defend. So she stopped asking. She stopped arguing. She stopped trying. And she started planning. The flight was booked quietly. No announcement. No producers. No dramatic teaser. Just a decision made by a woman who had reached emotional extinction. When she packed her bag, she reportedly felt no anger. No sadness. Just a strange calm. That calm that comes when you finally choose yourself after years of self-abandonment. Sumit noticed the shift too late. He noticed when Jenny stopped reacting. When she stopped crying. When she stopped seeking validation. When she stopped fighting with his family. When she started withdrawing emotionally. When she stopped talking about the future. That shift terrified him more than any argument ever could. Because when someone stops fighting, it means they are already gone. On the day she left, Sumit was reportedly at home. He knew she had plans but did not realize how serious she was. When he found out she had boarded the flight, he was stunned. Not because he thought she would never leave, but because he never thought she would leave without begging him to stop her. The internet erupted within hours. Fans dissected the airport photos. Body language experts analyzed her posture. Lip readers speculated on conversations with airport staff. Some believed this was a publicity stunt. Others believed it was the final chapter of a tragic love story. But one thing was clear: Jenny's departure felt different. It felt real. And then came the silence from Sumit. No post. No interview. No statement. Just quiet. That silence became the loudest confirmation that something had fundamentally broken. But this was only the beginning. Because what happened after Jenny landed back home shocked everyone, including Sumit's own family. And what she revealed to producers off-camera was something no one expected. Stay tuned. Because in the next part, we expose what Jenny allegedly told close friends, how Sumit reacted behind the scenes, and why this breakup could permanently change their reality TV legacy forever. When Jenny's plane landed, the story didn't end. It exploded. She didn't post a selfie. She didn't go live. She didn't give TLC a teaser clip. Instead, she disappeared into the quiet of a life she had forgotten she was allowed to have. And that silence was more terrifying than any breakup announcement. Sources close to Jenny say that when she arrived, she didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She slept. For nearly 12 hours. No alarms. No messages. No pressure. For the first time in years, her body wasn't bracing for criticism. Her mind wasn't preparing to justify her existence. She wasn't waiting for approval to breathe. She just existed. But behind the scenes, producers were scrambling. TLC thrives on chaos, but this wasn't scripted chaos. This was a real emotional collapse happening off-camera. When they tried to reach Jenny, she reportedly refused interviews. She refused filming. She refused to play the role of the dramatic abandoned wife. She said she was done being edited into a narrative that made her pain look entertaining. Sumit, meanwhile, was unraveling in private. Friends say he oscillated between denial and panic. At first, he believed Jenny would cool down and come back. He believed this was another dramatic moment that would fade. But when days passed with no contact, no plans to return, no reassurance, reality hit. He wasn't losing a storyline. He was losing control. Inside his family home, the reaction was mixed. Some relatives reportedly felt relieved. They believed the relationship had always been a social burden. But others noticed something strange. Sumit wasn't celebrating freedom. He wasn't relieved. He was destabilized. Because for years, Jenny had been the emotional constant he could rely on while maintaining his family safety net. Now that constant was gone. Producers allegedly attempted to negotiate a return storyline, a reconciliation arc, a dramatic tell-all showdown. But Jenny declined. She stated that her mental health was not a plot device. She said she had spent 10 years performing survival and she refused to perform pain anymore. Behind the scenes, Jenny confided in a close circle of friends about the psychological toll. She described waking up with anxiety every morning. She described feeling monitored, evaluated, and controlled in subtle ways. She described losing her sense of self. She described feeling like she had become a character in someone else's cultural drama instead of a human being. She also reportedly said something that shook her friends. "I don't know who I am outside of that house." That is what emotional control does. It doesn't break you loudly. It dissolves you quietly. Sumit attempted to reach out multiple times. Messages went unread. Calls went unanswered. For the first time, Jenny was not available for negotiation. She was not available for compromise. She was not available for guilt. She had drawn a line that could not be discussed. Fans began to notice the shift. Jenny stopped defending Sumit online. She stopped engaging in couple content. She stopped referencing India. She started posting about independence, self-growth, and emotional boundaries. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Psychologists who analyze reality TV dynamics pointed out something critical. Jenny's departure was not impulsive. It was the result of chronic emotional erosion. Years of invalidation, surveillance, cultural pressure, and dependency structures can create a psychological breaking point where leaving feels safer than staying. Sumit, on the other hand, faced a different crisis. He was forced to confront the reality that his attempt to maintain both traditional family approval and modern romantic partnership had failed. He had attempted to balance two worlds without fully committing to either. And in the end, he lost the one person who had been willing to sacrifice everything for him. But the story doesn't end here. Because insiders claim that Jenny's next move could change everything. legal consultations, financial negotiations, reality TV contract disputes, and the possibility of a public tell-all that could expose details never before revealed. And if Jenny decides to speak freely, without network filters, without cultural sensitivity edits, without protecting Sumit's image, the fallout could be massive. Not just for Sumit, but for the entire franchise. This is no longer just a love story gone wrong. This is a psychological case study in power, control, identity loss, and emotional liberation. And as millions watch this unfold, one question remains. Was Jenny and Sumit's relationship ever real love? Or was it a decade-long emotional illusion that finally collapsed under the weight of, but as Jenny rebuilt her silence into strength, Sumit was quietly spiraling into fear. Because when someone who has always begged for love suddenly stops asking for it, it doesn't just feel like rejection. It feels like erasure. Behind closed doors, Sumit reportedly started realizing how much emotional power he had taken for granted. He had always believed Jenny would stay. He believed her loyalty was permanent, unconditional, and unbreakable. That belief allowed him to delay decisions. Friends claim he started asking people close to Jenny if she was serious this time. He asked if she had met someone else. He asked if this was for attention. He asked if she would come back for filming. But no one had answers. And the absence of answers was worse than confirmation. Inside his family home, dynamics shifted. Some family members reportedly blamed Jenny, calling her dramatic and unstable. Others quietly questioned whether they had pushed too hard. But no one could ignore the fact that the woman who had endured everything had finally walked away without a fight. And then came the whispers. Whispers that Jenny had consulted a lawyer. Whispers that she was exploring legal separation options. Whispers that financial agreements between them were more complicated than fans realized. Whispers that TLC contracts could complicate any public divorce narrative. Reality TV relationships are not just emotional, they are legal, financial, and contractual. And when those contracts mix with real heartbreak, the fallout can become messy fast. Producers were reportedly desperate to secure a tell-all confrontation, a public breakdown, a tearful reunion, a dramatic accusation scene, because nothing sells like heartbreak. But Jenny reportedly refused to participate in any storyline that framed her departure as a dramatic tantrum. She wanted control over her narrative. Behind the scenes, she allegedly told a producer that she felt edited into a caricature for years. The older woman chasing a younger man. The desperate foreigner clashing with traditional family. The emotional outsider. She said those edits erased the complexity of her experience and reduced her pain to entertainment. Meanwhile, Sumit faced an identity crisis of his own. For years, he had built a public persona as the misunderstood romantic hero torn between love and tradition. But with Jenny gone, that narrative collapsed. Without her, he was forced to confront what he actually stood for. Was he a man who fought for love? Or a man who enjoyed love only when it didn't disrupt his comfort? Psychologists analyzing the situation noted something chilling. When one partner consistently sacrifices identity, culture, and autonomy while the other maintains social power and comfort, the relationship becomes structurally unequal. That imbalance can survive for years, until the sacrificed partner regains agency. Jenny's departure was not just a breakup. It was a power shift. And power shifts are terrifying for people who never realized they had power in the first place. Rumors began to circulate that Sumit attempted to negotiate her return. Promises were allegedly made. Boundaries were discussed. But Jenny reportedly responded with something unexpected. She said she didn't want negotiation. She wanted freedom. She didn't want compromise. She wanted space. She didn't want to rebuild the relationship. She wanted to rebuild herself. Fans began dividing into two camps. One group believed Jenny had wasted years chasing a fantasy. The other group believed she had been emotionally exploited and deserved liberation. Social media debates exploded, with viewers rewatching old episodes and noticing moments of subtle control they had previously ignored. Clips resurfaced where Sumit laughed off Jenny's discomfort, scenes where family members mocked her, moments where her boundaries were dismissed. What once looked like harmless cultural misunderstandings suddenly looked like systemic emotional pressure. And then came the biggest shock. Insiders hinted that Jenny was considering writing a memoir, a real, unfiltered account of her experience, without TLC edits, without cultural softening, without protecting anyone's image. If that happens, it could rewrite how fans see the entire relationship. Because reality TV shows what cameras capture, but memoirs reveal what cameras miss. As the story continued to unfold, one thing became painfully clear. Jenny was no longer the woman waiting for validation. She was the woman who walked away from validation. She was no longer asking for acceptance. She was defining her own acceptance. And Sumit? He was left confronting the echo of a relationship he never fully fought for until it was already gone. As rumors of divorce began spreading, the internet shifted from speculation to obsession. Fans weren't just watching anymore. They were investigating. Every Instagram post, every story view, every unfollow, every caption became evidence in a digital courtroom. And the verdict many viewers reached was simple. This was no longer just a rough patch. This was the end of a decade-long emotional experiment. Legal experts began weighing in. When two people marry across borders, across cultures, across financial systems, a breakup is never just emotional. It's paperwork, visas, contracts, and media agreements. Insiders whispered that Jenny had consulted legal professionals about residency rights, financial independence, and potential divorce settlements. Whether those rumors are confirmed or not, one thing was clear: she was no longer willing to be legally or emotionally trapped. Meanwhile, Sumit's world was collapsing in slow motion. Without Jenny, the house felt quieter. Too quiet. Friends claimed he spent long hours alone, scrolling through old photos, replaying moments he once took for granted. He reportedly tried to call her, text her, leave voice messages filled with confusion and regret. But regret has a strange timing. It often arrives only after the person who needed change has already left. Family reactions became even more intense. Some relatives reportedly felt embarrassed that the relationship had ended so publicly. Others feared social judgment. And some, surprisingly, expressed sympathy for Jenny, admitting privately that living in that household would have been suffocating for anyone. But those voices were never public. Publicly, tradition remained the shield. Then came the speculation about Jenny's new life. Was she dating someone new? Was she reconnecting with old friends? Was she rediscovering hobbies she had abandoned? Social media analysts noticed subtle changes. More confident captions, more solo content, more emphasis on independence and healing. No mention of Sumit. No mention of India. Just a woman rebuilding her identity piece by piece. Fans began projecting narratives. Some imagined a revenge glow-up arc. Some imagined a quiet healing journey. Some imagined a new romance storyline that could eclipse everything before it. But Jenny stayed silent. And that silence kept everyone watching. Reality TV experts noted that this breakup might become one of the most impactful emotional arcs in franchise history. Not because of cheating scandals or screaming matches, but because it represented something deeper. A woman choosing herself after years of self-erasure. A man confronting the consequences of emotional indecision. A family witnessing the limits of control. And a global audience watching a real emotional shift unfold. TLC insiders allegedly debated future storyline directions. A solo Jenny redemption arc. A broken-hearted Sumit confession tour. A reunion confrontation tell-all special. A psychological breakdown documentary. Every angle was being considered. But the truth remained uncertain. Because unlike scripted drama, real emotional fractures don't follow production schedules. And then, Jenny reportedly said something to a friend that summed it all up. She said she didn't hate Sumit. She didn't even regret the years. She just regretted how long it took her to realize she deserved more. That realization is more powerful than any breakup announcement. As viewers continue to speculate, one question hangs in the air. Will Jenny and Sumit ever speak publicly, unfiltered, without network edits, without cultural filters, without protecting reputations? And if they do, what truth will finally come out? Because sometimes, the biggest reality TV twist isn't a fight, a scandal, or a betrayal. Sometimes, it's a quiet decision made in an airport, in silence, when a woman finally chooses herself. And if this really is the end, then Jenny and Sumit's love story won't be remembered as a fairy tale or a tragedy. It will be remembered as a lesson. Lesson in power, identity, culture, sacrifice, and the moment someone. And as the dust settled, one truth became impossible to ignore. Jenny didn't just leave a man. She left a system. A system of expectations, silent rules, emotional pressure, and invisible boundaries that had shaped her life for a decade. When she walked into that airport alone, she wasn't running away. She was stepping into a version of herself she had buried for years. The world watched her as a reality TV character. But behind the edits, behind the dramatic music, behind the confessionals, she was a real person living in a house where love often felt conditional. And when love becomes conditional, survival becomes the priority. Sumit, on the other hand, was left confronting a reality he had never prepared for. He had believed love could exist alongside comfort without sacrifice. He believed tradition could coexist with autonomy without conflict. He believed time would solve everything. But time doesn't fix imbalance. Time magnifies it. And when Jenny finally chose herself, time stopped working in his favor. Insiders suggested that Sumit struggled with public perception after the split rumors. Fans questioned his actions. Critics reanalyzed his past decisions. Old clips resurfaced. Moments once seen as harmless suddenly looked manipulative. Laughter sounded dismissive. Silence sounded complicit. And indecision looked like control. Jenny's narrative, however, shifted. She was no longer just the older woman chasing a younger man. She became a symbol of late-life courage. A woman who proved it is never too late to leave, never too late to rebuild, never too late to reclaim yourself. Her story resonated with millions who saw their own silent struggles reflected in her quiet departure. Behind the scenes, speculation about a tell-all confession continued. If Jenny ever decided to speak openly, without filters, without network scripts, the revelations could redefine everything fans thought they knew. Untold arguments, unseen tears, hidden compromises, emotional negotiations never captured by cameras, and the psychological toll of being edited into a stereotype. But perhaps the most powerful part of this story is not what Jenny said or what Sumit did. It's what didn't happen. There was no dramatic fight on camera. No explosive cheating scandal. No viral meltdown. Just a woman quietly walking away. That silence became the loudest statement of all. Because sometimes, the most powerful breakups are not loud. They are calm. They are planned. They are final. As for Sumit, only time will reveal whether he learns from this loss or repeats the same cycle. Will he confront the balance between love and tradition? Will he recognize the cost of emotional indecision? Or will he remain the man who waited until love walked away to realize what he had? And Jenny, her story is just beginning. Whether she writes a memoir, starts a new chapter, finds new love, or simply enjoys solitude, she has already made the most important move of her life. She chose herself. So the next time you see a reality TV couple fighting on screen, remember this. The real story often happens off camera. The real breakdown happens in silence. And the real power move is not staying. It's leaving. This isn't just a breakup story. This is a human story. A story of identity, control, culture, and courage. And millions are watching to see what comes next. If you think Jenny made the right choice, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Sumit truly loved her, or was this relationship doomed from the start? And if Jenny decides to expose everything in a tell-all, would you watch it? Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking reality TV breakdowns, hidden truths, and emotional stories you won't see on mainstream TV. This is TLC Drama Live, and we'll see you in the next story. And while the public saw only headlines and speculation, the emotional aftermath continued to unfold in ways no camera could capture. Jenny's departure didn't just shock Sumit. It forced everyone around him to confront uncomfortable truths they had avoided for years. Inside the family, conversations shifted. Some relatives questioned whether tradition had been weaponized instead of preserved. Others insisted Jenny was never meant to fit in and that the relationship was always destined to fail. But behind closed doors, even Sumit's strongest supporters began to notice how deeply he had depended on Jenny's emotional presence without ever fully defending her. Experts in relationship psychology analyzed their dynamic as a textbook case of emotional asymmetry. One partner sacrifices identity, autonomy, and comfort to maintain love, while the other partner maintains social security and control structures. This imbalance can survive only as long as the sacrificing partner believes the relationship is worth losing themselves. Jenny's decision marked the collapse of that illusion. Meanwhile, Sumit reportedly began experiencing what psychologists call delayed grief. Not the loud crying type, but the slow realization that a chapter of life has closed permanently. Friends described him as withdrawn, contemplative, and confused. He had spent years believing Jenny would always be there, no matter what. Now he was forced to imagine a life without her presence as his emotional anchor. TLC producers reportedly debated whether to pivot the storyline into a psychological deep dive season. A broken relationship, cultural conflict, mental health awareness, and identity loss are powerful themes that resonate far beyond reality TV audiences. But Jenny's refusal to participate complicated everything. Without her consent, the story could not be framed the way the network preferred. And then came the digital rewatch phenomenon. Fans started rewatching old episodes with new eyes. Scenes once dismissed as cultural misunderstandings suddenly felt darker. Moments when Jenny's discomfort was laughed off, when Sumit avoided confrontation, when family members imposed strict rules. Viewers began asking whether the show had normalized emotional pressure for the sake of entertainment.